So look, we might hit pause right there on have a break from some of that technical detail, and look here from the first Tasmanian farmers who've gone through the registration and baselining process for an ERF soil project. And I have to say, we're really excited to be working with Steph and Sam Trethewey. So I might throw over to you first, Steph, just to get some background insight on the motivations to participate in a project like Soil Carbon, and then what those key sort of motivations are in terms of better soil management. And I'll leave it to your good selves to provide your introductions as well. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be on here chatting. I'll be quite brief. So just wanted to give a quick intro to TasAgco, myself, and a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing with Soil Carbon. So my background is actually in journalism. I was a TV journalist for about 7 or 8 years, and brand and marketing and storytelling is really my sweet spot. Those are my strengths. I'm not going to pretend that I'm the production guru. That's all Sam, and he'll talk to that in a minute. But what we're doing at TasAgco is we produce grass-fed Wagyu that's regeneratively farmed. It's still early days. We're going to market at the end of this year, which is very exciting. And you know, when Sam and I started this business a couple of years ago, you know, we wanted to look at like what were the future trends of food and what we call beyond sustainable. Sustainability is a word that's thrown around a lot in food and pretty overrated. I think you know, we're looking to go beyond that, and that's where I guess regenerative agriculture comes in, and where our Soil Carbon project comes in. So from a brand perspective, it's really a no-brainer for us. We're seeing a lot of data and market research come through about the increasing number of consumers that are more and more environmentally conscious. So while for farmers there's huge, you know, productivity gains and extra revenue streams to be made, which is awesome, at its core, from a brand perspective, for any food brands out there or not, just in general, it's really good validation to know that that's sort of where the world is heading, and domestically as well. So that's really exciting for us. And we're seeing, you know, organisations like the NFF that recently announced their biodiversity certification program, and some other, you know, projects happening in this space. So it's all, you know, it's all where everything's heading. So for us, as I said, it was a no-brainer to do this, and it's all about building data, which, you know, Sam will talk to about from a production point of view. Not many people have done this before, and the ones that have, there's probably lots out there, but we don't have any data to show farmers, you know, on what's happening in this space. And that's what's really exciting about AgriProve is, you know, we're starting to build our data journey for our farm and for our brand, and it's sort of backed internationally, which is, you know, again, why we decided to go with them. So enough of the brand and marketing stuff. Sam is going to talk more about, from a production point of view, you know, what we're up to, how our project sort of has unfolded. It is early days, and yeah, I guess why we're doing this. So I'll hand over to him, do a quick swap.
Very an elegant change over here on these webinars at home. That thanks, Steph. And it's great to be here. So I'll jump straight into it. So from a production point of view, we run just under 700 acres, run around 800 head of cattle on that, and we're scaling, I'd have to say, pretty aggressively, with more cattle and more land coming on board soon. And I suppose we're essentially a fattening operation. So happy to, essentially we're a fattening operation. A little bit of background on me and carbon. So actually the old man was one of the first in the Tassie, I think, to do Terry McCosker's RCS course back in about 1982 or 1983. And I've been fortunate enough to have been around those farming practices much of my life, or my adult life, and I suppose that's that regenerative or rotational grazing type approach, which does over time sequester carbon, and that was always a focus for us, knowing that it was improving productivity, improving dry matter production, of course, kilos of beef or wool or whatever it is produced per hectare. So I started to see that, and then I went working on farms all over Australia and overseas. I've probably worked on, I don't know, including some contracting, and I've done 50, 60 plus farms, and in different climates from central Queensland all the way through to Tassie and Victoria. And after a while, you soon start to notice who does things really well and who doesn't. And some of the guys that I've either worked down the road from or have worked for, they've still got a green tinge in a pretty average drought, or they're trading lambs when old mate down the road's shooting old ewes. And I suppose to be upfront, those guys focused on real soil health, and I mean true soil health, not the stuff that fertiliser companies tell you about. These guys are sequestering carbon and doing something very, very different and increasing their water holding capacity, which is funny because at the moment I'm trying to get rid of water off our farm. But so yeah, that's, I suppose, where I started to kind of click onto this kind of carbon piece. So just as a quick background to our carbon position. So we've actually just up until last week, it was measured, we've got the highest parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere now, from obviously burning coal and fossil fuels and all that stuff. And also our farming practices, we've released trillions of tons of carbon dioxide from our farming practices since World War II. And so I suppose this is about getting it back into the soil. So there's heaps of carbon dioxide, which increases the nutrient density of our soils, and heaps of free nitrogen in the form of nitrous oxide above us as well. And these multi-species are a great way to get that back into the soil. Let's get one thing straight. Organic carbon or organic matter is not organic material. So just wanted to make that really, really clear, that some people think that, mulch and stubble and green manure and things like that we can do on farm is actually putting carbon in the soil, and it kind of is, but it's not really. It's organic material. For it to be turned into organic matter, it has to be broken down, and it's usually a ratio of about 10 to 1. So for 10 kilos of organic material, you'll be able to get 1 kilo of organic matter, which is humus. So you're actually creating soil. And obviously the best way to do that, like gardeners all know, is to increase your microbiology. And so I suppose I just wanted to kind of be clear on that, because that's what you're getting measured on. You're getting measured when you look at a soil test, I suppose, on your inert and slow pools of carbon, not your labile carbon. Your labile carbon is that very volatile kind of organic material kind of component. To my understanding, I'm no soil expert. So I suppose the way we sequester carbon is through management. And a part of what Matthew's talking about with AgriProve is that once you set up your soil carbon project, we know that farming in a conventional way does not sequester carbon as a generalisation. The application of the products and inputs that we've been using for only about 70 or so years isn't conducive to putting carbon in the ground. In actual fact, that specifically designed farming system doesn't pay much attention to organic carbon at all, as any of you that have been farming in it would be aware. So I suppose we've got to be bringing in some different and new management practices that are conducive to sequestering carbon. And I'll talk about mine in just a second. One of the reasons we wanted to work with AgriProve, and to be really upfront, AgriProve aren't paying us to say this or anything. AgriProve for us, I was working in agri-technology, ag tech, for the last 3 years. And it was interesting. The reason I bring that up is it's a new and emerging space, much like the carbon kind of and soil carbon space. And when you get in a new and emerging space, you get a lot of newcomers that perhaps, don't live up to their expectations that they set themselves, or they don't deliver on their promises. And I suppose, to be upfront, you get a whole heap of cowboys coming into the space. And for me, having met with Matthew, must be about 2 years ago now, for me, the things that I was attracted to with AgriProve is firstly the support. So it's not just, we baseline your farm and catch you in a couple of years when you need to do it again. Matthew's investing, and he'll go through that in a second. He's investing in Tasmania now, as far as putting people, resources, tools and stuff on the ground for farmers like you and I to help us increase our carbon levels. I suppose that the compliance piece is enormous. So AgriProve actually have digitised that and have turned it into an online platform. I personally, typical of my generation, I hate paper. Everything is done online if you want it to be. And it's really cool to log in and see your farm there and be able to ask questions, change, add things. And I know that they're doing some more and more work in that space with apps and other things. So that actually removes an enormous amount of compliance away from us, which means we can keep doing what we do, which is farming. And it leaves the compliance and all those heavy regulations and legislative components of this very confusing and complex space to people that know what they're doing. So yeah, it removes the compliance away, provides support. And I suppose lastly, I've found AgriProve and Corporate Carbon very professional and really sophisticated to deal with. Having spent a few years in the corporate world, I found these guys on par, and it was really great to do a really clean cut business. You know exactly where you stand. So I just wanted to kind of outline that. Just wanted to move on now to, our actual project. So we did 18 digs down a metre across the farm. So soil carbon is measured down to a metre. One question we often get is, well, what happens when we saturate our carbon, or we've got too much carbon, or we kind of hit a ceiling? The reality is all the research that I've done is that you'd be struggling for me to get there in my lifetime. And also remembering we are measuring to a metre. So, okay, it might be, we can increase our carbon levels to, 5 or 6 or 7% over the next 10 or so plus years to kind of 30 centimetres, but to go down to a metre is something else altogether. So there is an enormous amount of work to do, but also an enormous amount of opportunity. So the dig sites are randomly selected by a computer, which can't be tampered with, across the area. And this all comes back to the compliance and auditable process that AgriProve use. And then, their GPS, obviously, location to very, very accurate, and that's where the dig has to be. Next time you baseline, those dig spots will obviously be randomly selected again and will be different. And obviously an aggregation of that data and then a baseline and comparison between the two is where you get that increase or decrease in carbon. Of course, as you know, on your farms, you'd have areas that aren't going to sequester carbon, like other areas will, like the rocky face of a hill, or you've got tree, bush country, or swampy areas, or dams, houses, roads. So a part of the project set up with AgriProve is that you actually carve those areas out. So, if you've got a 500 hectare farm, by the time you've carved all that out, you might end up with a project area of 420 hectares. And that's actually what's in the project, which is what you've got to focus your management on. And that's where you get paid for any sequestration of carbon. So just lastly to finish, so my management plan, which has to be submitted as a part of the compliance and registration work with AgriProve, comes down to a few things. So a big part for me is what I've grown up with. It's what I know is time-controlled grazing, cell grazing, call it whatever you want. We were obviously going to do that anyway, but that's a part of our management plan. And we've got a bit of, I suppose, years and data behind us that we know that we can, make an impact doing that. But the big one, and Matthew's already touched on it, is multi-species. So we've sown down about 30% of our farm to multi-species now. We've got, I think, over 23 different varieties in our paddocks. So the way that works from a farm production point of view is you want one of the 4 or 5 families. So you want, you've got legumes, brassicas, cereals, grasses, and quinopods, which is a bit of a random one, and they're pretty hard to find, especially ones that grow in Tassie. So I've aimed for at least 3 or 4 legumes, and that's obviously to bring that nitrogen fixation into play, because we're not using synthetic fertilizers. You obviously want, a couple of brassicas, a couple of cereals, and some grasses. And I suppose the reason this is, and I'm going to get a bit environmental here, but it's basically mimicking what Mother Nature does. So if you go into any natural ecosystem in the world, you do not see what we do in farming, which is where we have monocultures or 2 varieties, ryegrass and clover as an example, or a paddock of wheat or anything like that. You don't see that in nature. Mother Nature works really well when lots of different things grow together. And if you speak to any regenerative farmers around the world, of which there are many, many thousands, having enormous success in dry matter yield production, kilos of beef produced, lamb produced, whatever you're producing per hectare, by utilising multi-species. And it really plays into the hands of what Mother Nature likes, which is where we grow lots of different things together, and they all interact differently. They all use the soil differently. They all feed different microbes, which help other plants. And you've only got to walk into the Aussie bush to see her at work. And I suppose we've seen that on our own farm, where we've got Scotch thistle and dock. Usually in a conventional system, you just go out and nuke them. But what is it they both have that my pasture doesn't? Well, they both have got taproots. So why don't we sow some stuff in that has got taproots? Because obviously nature's trying to grow some taproots. And what happens when we put in chicory and tillage radish and other stuff with taproots is they go gangbusters. The good thing is cattle will eat that stuff, whereas they won't eat Scotch thistle and dock. So all of a sudden, when we mix that in with other species, they're annuals mostly. We're doing annuals for the first few years, and then we'll start to integrate some perennial multi-species. Those annuals die off, which obviously once the microbes and worms will then break down that into that organic carbon, they'll turn that organic material into organic matter, and we start to increase our carbon levels through that process. So that's a couple of different ways that we're doing it. It is a bit of a paradigm shift. I have found, having spent 17 plus years in the conventional systems where we do things a little bit differently. And then lastly is, the first piece is time control grazing, second is multi-species, and the last part is enabling biology in our soils. And again, that comes in the form of multi-species is a great way to kickstart your biology. Mycorrhizal fungi loves oats. So I've got 3 different types of oats in. And I suppose really, well, we've gotten rid of all synthetic fert because it burns off carbon. Excess nitrogen does burn off carbon, and it knocks microbiology around, given its makeup, as do herbicides and pesticides, fungicides. So fungicides kill fungi, good and bad. Insecticides kill insects, good and bad. So you can't expect to increase some level of life when you're spraying this stuff out, and that might be something that some people might not want to hear, but that's the way it is. So I suppose the way we enable that biology is through using I suppose organic or more natural fertilizers, which we're kind of having a good run with. And we haven't lost a lot of productivity on our farm since we've switched over this system. And my final point would be is they do say it takes about 3 years to kind of, and anyone that's been running a farm for any amount of time knows it takes 2 to 3 years to fully implement and see the results in a significant change of management. And this is no different. They say it takes 2 to 3 years of priming your soils and working with these multi-species until you can start to see your soils take on, really beautiful aggregation, take on, big worm populations, increase its water holding capacity, and ultimately start to see that humus be created. So yeah, that's probably my bit. I'll wrap up on that and hand back to Matthew, and I'll be around for questions later in the discussion.